By 10 o'clock, nearly half of Bellwater had gathered in the market hall to watch Eleanor Vale lose her name. Rain darkened the tall windows, and wet umbrellas crowded the aisle between farmers, tradesmen, and estate tenants. At the front stood a linen-backed map measuring 6 feet across. Eleanor had drawn most of it herself, every boundary walked, every angle measured, every acreage calculated twice. Yet the title beneath the Vale Surveying Office carried only one name: Gideon Vale, her uncle. Gideon rested one polished hand on the map. "My niece has disputed this survey," he announced, "and has thereby questioned the lawful holdings of several respected gentlemen." A murmur travelled through the hall. Eleanor remained beside the clerk's table, holding the leather field book that had belonged to her father. She could feel the eyes lingering on her plain black dress and rain-stained boots. "The western boundary is wrong," she said. "The line from Stag Beck was moved 430 yards east. That error removes the old Bellwater watercourse from the parish allotment." Gideon smiled with the patience of a man correcting a child. "My late brother encouraged Eleanor's enthusiasm for measurement. Unfortunately, enthusiasm is not qualification. Her father, Samuel Vale, had taught her to use a surveyor's compass before she was tall enough to sight across its brass rim. At 12, she had carried the rear pin of his Gunter's chain. At 17, she could calculate irregular acreage more accurately than either of his assistants. After illness weakened his hands, she had completed much of the fieldwork issued under his name. None of that mattered inside a hall where every official seat belonged to a man. Gideon turned to the parish clerk. "Record that the disputed figures originated in Samuel Vale's final calculations, made while his health was failing." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the field book. "The figures are mine." Silence followed. Not disbelief exactly, but something colder. The admission allowed Gideon to protect the Vale office by sacrificing her. He lifted a prepared document. "My niece may sign a statement withdrawing her objection. In return, I have arranged an annual allowance of £20 and a respectable position as companion to Mrs. Harcourt in Penrith." Eleanor read the first line. It declared that her correction had resulted from inexperience and emotional distress. "And if I refuse?" Her uncle gestured to Mr. Pritchard, the family solicitor. The thin man opened a japanned document box and removed a folded deed. "Your mother's trust contains one remaining asset," he said. "The former Bellwater mineral baths, with the ground immediately belonging to it. Mr. Vale is prepared to transfer the property to you in full settlement." Laughter rose from the rear benches. Bellwater Baths had been closed for 27 years. Its roof was said to leak into every room. Its western wing had settled toward the marsh, and the mineral spring for which it had been built had long since vanished. Even children avoided the place because villagers claimed its empty pipes groaned after dark. "There are unpaid parish rates," Pritchard added quietly. £23 and 14 shillings. The building may also require demolition if judged unsafe. Gideon placed the withdrawal beside the deed. "Security or stubbornness, Eleanor? Choose carefully." She thought of the rented room she would lose above the surveying office. She had £7 11 shillings in her purse, no recognised profession, and no relative willing to oppose Gideon. Accepting Bellwater Baths meant debt, cold, and possibly a roof collapsing over her bed. Signing meant allowing her uncle's false boundary to become the accepted truth. Eleanor laid her father's field book on the table and removed his brass compass from its worn wooden case. The instrument was scratched, its sight vein slightly bent from the day he had fallen near Stag Beck. She remembered him correcting her first crooked line. A surveyor does not draw the land as powerful men wish it to be. She draws what is there. Eleanor pushed the withdrawal toward Gideon. Then she signed the deed. Her uncle's smile vanished for only a moment. "You must vacate your room by 6 this evening." "I shall." "You will discover that pride provides very little heat." "Then it is fortunate you have left me so much timber." The laughter this time was smaller and quickly smothered. Pritchard sealed the transfer before 2 witnesses. He handed Eleanor the deed, one rusted iron key, and a brittle estate plan dated 1816. Gideon departed without speaking to her again. At dusk, Eleanor boarded the carrier's cart, bound for the northern edge of the village. Her possessions filled one trunk: clothing, drawing paper, a folding rule, her father's compass, 2 plumb bobs, and the field book Gideon had failed to confiscate. Only after the market hall disappeared behind the rain did she unfold the deed beneath the cart's canvas cover. The Bathhouse boundary ran from the old coach road to a stone marker beside Stag Beck. Unlike Gideon's new survey, it continued westward across land now claimed by the Vale estate. Beneath the description of the building appeared a clause written in faded brown ink. Together with the springhead, upper reservoir, culverts, conduits, and all perpetual rights of water attached thereto. Eleanor read it twice. Bellwater Baths had been mocked for 27 years because it possessed no water. Yet according to the deed her uncle had just placed in her hands, the ruined bathhouse did not merely receive a spring, it owned one. Eleanor folded the deed and slipped it inside her coat before the wind could tear it from her hands. The carrier, Ned Harrow, glanced at the iron key resting in her lap. "You truly mean to stay there tonight?" "I have nowhere else to stay." "That was not what I asked." The cart had left the last cottages behind. Beyond the hedges, black fields climbed toward the western ridge, while Stag Beck ran unseen below the road. Eleanor noticed 3 village women standing beside a public pump with covered pails. One worked the handle, but only a brown trickle emerged. "They have trouble with the pump?" she asked. "With the wells," Ned said. "Lower village water has tasted of iron since summer. Doctor blames the old quarry workings. Mr. Vale says a new bore would cost more than the parish can afford." The cart rounded a stand of wind-bent beeches, and Bellwater Baths appeared against the fading sky. The central building was larger than Eleanor had expected. 2 stories of grey limestone, with a columned entrance and tall windows blinded by boards. Ivy had entered the joints along the north wall. The roof sagged above the western wing, and half the guttering lay twisted in the weeds. Behind the main building stood the dark brick shell of a boiler house. Ned stopped at the broken gate. "I will carry your trunk to the steps," he said. "No farther." Eleanor did not argue. She paid him a shilling for a bundle of straw, 6 pieces of firewood, and the use of his lantern until morning. He left so quickly that the wheels sprayed mud across the gateposts. The rusted key resisted until Eleanor braced one boot against the door. When the lock finally turned, the sound travelled through the building like a pistol shot. Cold, mineral-scented air met her inside. Her lantern revealed a reception hall with a cracked black and white floor. A chandelier hung crooked above a desk buried beneath plaster. To the left, double doors opened onto a long bathing gallery. where stained curtains drooped between marble tubs. To the right stood a parlour, a manager's office, and a staircase with 3 missing balusters. Someone had painted a warning across the wall in tar: "No water, no mercy." Eleanor touched the lettering. It was not old. The tar remained soft enough to mark her glove. A gust slammed the entrance behind her. She forced herself to begin with practical matters. Darkness would be complete within an hour, and the temperature was falling. She needed one room with a sound ceiling, a door that closed, and a chimney capable of drawing smoke. The front parlour failed the first test. Rain had rotted the joists above it. The manager's office had a solid floor, but a jackdaw's nest blocked the flue. An attendant's room behind the bathing gallery proved better. Its window was cracked rather than broken, and the small fireplace contained only loose soot. Eleanor removed her coat, climbed onto a chair, and worked the blockage free with a length of curtain rod. Soot covered her hair and dress, but 20 minutes later, a cautious fire burned without filling the room with smoke. She spread the straw beneath her blanket and ate bread and cheese from her trunk. Every few minutes, the building answered the wind with a groan, a scrape, or the dull fall of plaster. Then came 3 hollow knocks beneath the floor. Eleanor stopped chewing. The knocks did not return. She told herself that iron pipes contracted as the temperature fell. Her father had often warned her that unfamiliar buildings encouraged the imagination to replace measurement. She took up the lantern. The bathing gallery ran almost the full length of the building. 12 marble tubs stood in pairs, each fed by 2 iron pipes. Green corrosion marked the joints, and several taps had been removed. At the western end, a half-open door revealed a tiled pump chamber. A maze of pipes crossed its walls. Most had been painted red or black, presumably to distinguish hot water from cold. A large horizontal pipe entered through the western masonry, passed beneath a corroded pressure vessel, and disappeared under the tiled floor. Eleanor held her palm against it. The iron was colder than the room. She unpacked her folding rule and measured the pipe's height at the outer wall. Then she followed it across the chamber and measured again where it entered the floor. The difference was small but unmistakable. The pipe rose 3 inches while travelling toward the baths. That made no sense. Without a working pump, gravity could not carry water upward through it. Yet the pressure vessel had been disconnected, and the boiler house had not operated in decades. Eleanor examined the stonework around the pipe. The mortar was darker than the surrounding wall and far less weathered. Someone had opened the masonry and resealed it after the bathhouse closed. She raised the lantern. Above the patched section, almost hidden beneath flaking paint, was a small brass elevation plate, stamped with the number 312. Her father's field book contained hundreds of elevations. Eleanor hurried back to the attendant's room, opened it beside the fire, and searched the pages concerning Stag Beck. Near the final entry, she found a figure written in Samuel Vale's weakening hand. Bellwater Western Culvert, 308 feet. Eleanor stared at the 2 numbers. The pipe inside the abandoned bathhouse stood 4 feet higher than the culvert that was supposed to feed it. Before she could calculate what that meant, 3 hollow knocks sounded again. This time they came from inside the western wall. Eleanor returned to the pump chamber, but did not strike the wall. A concealed space was possible, yet so were loose stones, trapped water, rats, or a cracked flue carrying sound from another part of the building. Opening masonry at night without knowing what supported the floor above would turn curiosity into foolishness. She marked the location of the knocks in her field book and went back to the fire. Sleep came in narrow intervals. By dawn, frost had silvered the broken windows, and the room smelled of wet stone and wood smoke. Eleanor had one heel of bread remaining and enough firewood for perhaps another night. Before investigating anything, she needed to make part of Bellwater Baths livable. She began in the manager's office. After removing the jackdaw's nest, she tested the chimney with a twist of burning paper. The smoke rose cleanly. She dragged the ruined desk away from the damp wall, swept plaster from the floor, and covered the cracked window with 2 boards taken from a collapsed cupboard. An old drugget, beaten outside and turned stain side down, made the room look less abandoned. By 9 o'clock, Eleanor had created a dry sleeping corner, a work table, and a shelf for her food. It was not a home, but it was one room the ruin could no longer claim. A heavy knock sounded at the entrance. The man waiting outside had broad shoulders, a greying beard, and a mason's hammer hanging from his belt. "Matthew Bell," he said. "Parish clerk sent me to determine whether the place is likely to fall onto the road. Only the eastern wall borders the road. That wall may be all they care about." Matthew stepped inside reluctantly. He had attended the meeting, Eleanor remembered, standing near the rear without laughing. His boots stopped at the tarred warning. "That was painted recently," she said. "About a fortnight ago." "Do you know by whom?" "No." His answer came too quickly, but Eleanor let it rest. She showed him the cracked joists above the front parlour, the settled floor in the western gallery, and a fracture running from the second-story sill toward a blocked drain. Matthew examined each defect with increasing attention. "You already know which rooms are unsafe," he said. "I know where the weight has moved. That is not the same as knowing how badly the timbers have rotted." It was an answer her father would have approved of, precise about both knowledge and limitation. Matthew climbed halfway up the stairs and tested the landing with his hammer. "West roof requires shores before anyone works beneath it. Eastern section might last the winter if the gutters are cleared. Boiler house wall is finished." "How much to shore the roof?" "With salvaged timber? £4, perhaps 5. More if the rafters have split." Nearly all her money. Eleanor wrote the estimate in her field book. "I cannot hire you yet." "I did not suppose you could. But I can pay 6pence for an hour's help measuring the exterior." Matthew looked toward the door, as though checking whether anyone had seen him enter. "Keep your 6pence. I will hold the tape." They started at the northeast corner. Eleanor established a baseline along the front facade, noting each projection, doorway, and change in masonry. Matthew held the zero end of her measuring tape while she recorded the distances. When the ground rose along the western wall, they used a plumb bob to keep the measurements level. The pump chamber measured 25 feet and 7 inches across inside. Outside, the same section measured 29 feet and 9 inches. Even allowing for 2 thick stone walls, more than 4 feet had disappeared. "Could be a service passage," Matthew said. "Then it should have an entrance." They searched the exterior. Ivy concealed much of the western masonry, but when Matthew pulled it aside, Eleanor found a vertical line of smaller stones extending from ground level to the first floor sill. The mortar along that line was darker, matching the patch around the impossible pipe inside. She pressed the tip of her folding rule into a joint. The mortar crumbled. "Not original," Matthew said. "Perhaps 20 or 30 years old. The bathhouse closed 27 years ago." He met her gaze. "Then someone sealed it near the time of closing." At the base of the wall, dead nettles covered a shallow depression. Eleanor cleared them with a broken roof slate and uncovered the corner of a dressed stone. A narrow groove had been cut across its surface, followed by the stamped letters B.W. Matthew took one step backward. "You recognize it?" "My father did. That is a Bellwater conduit marker. They once stood along the channel from the upper spring." "Where is the upper spring?" "On Vale land now." Eleanor opened the 1816 estate plan and showed him the western boundary. Matthew studied it, then glanced toward the ridge beyond the trees. "That line has not been used in my lifetime." "It was moved." "So you said yesterday." "So the deed says today." For the first time, he looked at her without skepticism. A girl of perhaps 10 appeared at the gate, carrying a covered pail. Matthew introduced her as his daughter, Annie. She had brought his dinner and water drawn from their cottage well on the higher ground. Matthew poured half the clean water into Eleanor's empty jug. "I cannot take your family's supply," she said. "You paid for an hour. Call the water part of it." "You refused the 6pence. Then call it professional courtesy." It was a small kindness, offered awkwardly, but it was the first Bellwater had given her. As they prepared to leave, Annie pointed toward the western wall. "Is that where Mr. Vale's men were digging?" Matthew went still. Eleanor crouched to the girl's height. "When did you see them?" "Last summer. 2 men with spades and a measuring pole. Mr. Vale told them to cover everything before the rain came." Eleanor looked at the freshly mortared line, the hidden width, and the conduit marker someone had tried to bury. Her uncle had not given her Bellwater Baths because he believed the property contained nothing. He had given it to her because he believed he had already removed whatever mattered. Matthew's expression told Eleanor that Annie's memory was accurate. "Who were the men?" Eleanor asked. Annie looked to her father before answering. "One was Mr. Clegg from the Vale estate. The other had a red scarf." Matthew placed a hand on her shoulder. "That is enough. Your mother will be waiting." After they left, Eleanor returned to the western wall. Gideon's men had not come merely to inspect an abandoned building. They had dug beside a conduit marker, then concealed their work beneath loose earth and nettles. She spent the remaining daylight copying every relevant measurement onto a single sheet. The brass plate in the pump chamber stood at 312 feet above sea level. Her father had recorded the western culvert at 308. Water could not rise 4 feet without pressure, yet the bathhouse deed mentioned an upper reservoir. If that reservoir stood high enough, the impossible slope would cease to be impossible. The next morning, Eleanor followed the old boundary toward Stag Beck. Every 50 yards, she stopped to take a compass bearing and measure the change in elevation. The original watercourse had nearly vanished beneath brambles, but shallow depressions in the ground formed a line toward the western ridge. She found a second dressed stone beside a hawthorn hedge. It bore the same letters, B.W., and a chiselled arrow pointing uphill. The ground beyond belonged to the Vale estate, according to Gideon's map. According to Eleanor's deed, however, a narrow strip containing the conduit remained attached to Bellwater Baths. She did not cross until she had checked the bearing twice. 20 yards beyond the hedge, The soil had been disturbed recently. Spade marks remained visible beneath dead leaves. Eleanor knelt and pushed her folding rule into the earth. Less than 6 inches below the surface, it struck stone. She cleared a narrow section and uncovered a capped channel built from fitted slate. One slab had been broken, exposing a cavity filled with fresh clay. Gideon's men had not removed the conduit. They had blocked it. The discovery gave Eleanor an answer, but also an immediate problem. Rainwater was running down the hill and collecting against the obstruction. If the channel filled during a hard storm, pressure might force water through the weakened masonry beneath the bathhouse. She marked the location and returned before noon. Matthew was waiting with a written estimate for temporary roof supports. He could brace the western rafters and clear the eastern gutters for 18 shillings in labour. Salvaged timber, nails, rope and cartage would cost another £1.19. Eleanor counted her money twice. Paying him would leave £4.13. She still owed the parish more than £23, needed food and coal, and had no income. "Begin with the supports," she said. "The gutters can wait." "The next rain may not." "Then clear the eastern gutter and leave the southern one. I will do that myself." Matthew considered arguing, then altered the estimate. By evening, timber shores stood beneath the most dangerous rafters. Eleanor spent the following day on a ladder, removing moss and decayed leaves from the guttering. Her hands blistered, and cold rain soaked through both sleeves, but water finally flowed into the old drains instead of down the interior walls. The work revealed another clue. The eastern drain emptied into a broken stone trough behind the boiler house. The western downpipe did not join it. Instead, it vanished through the wall beside the sealed 4-foot space. Rainwater from half the roof had once been directed into the hidden section. That afternoon, Mr. Pritchard arrived in a closed carriage. He entered the manager's office without removing his gloves and placed a document on Eleanor's repaired desk. "Your uncle regrets the unpleasantness of yesterday's proceedings. It occurred 4 days ago. Mr. Vale has been occupied. With blocking water channels." Pritchard's eyes moved toward her field notes before returning to her face. "I have been authorized to offer £75 for Bellwater Baths. Mr. Vale will also assume responsibility for the unpaid rates." The property had been called worthless before the entire village. Now Gideon was offering enough money to support her modestly for several years. Why? The estate may wish to remove the structure. Then why not wait for the parish to condemn it? Pritchard folded his hands. £75 is a generous solution to your circumstances. It is a generous price for a ruin and a poor one for whatever my uncle believes remains beneath it. The solicitor's courtesy hardened. "The deed grants you the bathhouse. It does not permit trespass upon Vale land. The original boundary includes the conduit. An obsolete line on an obsolete plan will not prevail against decades of recognized possession. Then Gideon has nothing to fear from my measurements." Pritchard took back the offer. 7 days, Miss Vale. After that, the sum will be withdrawn." When the carriage disappeared, Eleanor locked the entrance and returned to the pump chamber. She removed flaking plaster from the edge of the sealed section, working carefully with Matthew's borrowed masonry chisel. Beneath the plaster, the vertical seam continued in a perfect line. The knocking sound returned whenever wind pressed against the western wall, but now Eleanor understood it. Something flat and metallic was moving slightly behind the stone facing. Near the floor, her chisel struck iron. She cleared a patch no larger than her palm. What emerged was not a pipe or reinforcing plate, but the curved end of a hinge. Its pin had been installed backward, placing the working joint inside the hidden space. Eleanor moved the lantern higher. The stones sealing the 4 missing feet were not a wall. They were a doorway, built to resemble one. Eleanor resisted the urge to force it open alone. At first light, she walked to Matthew Bell's cottage and showed him a drawing of the hinge, the surrounding masonry, and the section of wall above it. He studied the sketch while Annie watched from the kitchen table. "If your measurements are right, the arch carries the weight," he said. "If they are wrong, we may lose the pump room ceiling." Matthew brought 2 iron bars, a mallet, and timber for an additional shore. By mid-morning, they had braced the nearest beam and removed enough plaster to expose the doorway's outline. Thin limestone slabs had been fixed to an iron face and mortared around the edges so carefully that the opening appeared to be part of the wall. "Someone spent money hiding this," Matthew said, "and more money sealing it again." Fresh tool scratches marked the lower stones. Gideon's men had reached the door from the outside, but apparently had not found the interior release. The knocking came from an iron latch vibrating behind the facing. Eleanor located it by tapping the wall and comparing the sound. One section produced a clear metallic note. She removed a narrow strip of mortar, inserted the tip of her folding rule, and pressed downward. Something clicked. The door shifted inward 1/2 inch, releasing a breath of air that smelled of iron, lamp oil, and cold stone. Matthew pulled it open with an iron bar. The hidden space was scarcely 4 feet wide, but extended the length of the pump chamber. Copper pipes climbed its walls in orderly rows. Small valves, each fitted with an ivory label, connected them to a cylindrical pressure vessel rising through the floor. Unlike the machinery outside, these fittings had been protected from damp. Their metal surfaces remained dark but intact. Eleanor stepped inside with the lantern. A slate panel on the western wall displayed a diagram cut into its surface. 3 lines met at a circle representing Bellwater Baths. One ran uphill and was labelled Upper Spring, another descended toward Stag Beck. The third continued east beneath the words Public Main. "There has never been a public main," Matthew said. "Not one recorded by the parish." He traced the eastern line without touching it. Where would it go? Toward the lower village. Near the diagram, a brass plate carried the maker's inscription: M. Dacre Bellwater, Pressure and Purification Apparatus, Trial 3, 1855. Eleanor searched her memory. The bathhouse had been founded by Dr. Elias Dacre, whose mineral treatments once attracted wealthy visitors from as far as York. She had never heard of an engineer named M. Dacre. Matthew knew only that the Dacre family had left Bellwater after the baths closed. "People said the spring failed," he added. "Then fever took 3 visitors in the same month. After that, no respectable guest would come." Eleanor examined the machinery more closely. 2 fittings had been removed from the pressure vessel, leaving bright circular marks beneath the grime. Dust outlined a rectangular object missing from a narrow shelf. "Gideon's men entered from the outer wall," she said. "They took something. Copper, perhaps. They left more valuable copper than they removed." She found clay packed inside the pipe marked Upper Spring. It matched the fresh clay used to block the conduit on the hillside. Whoever had done the work wanted the system dry rather than dismantled. Below the slate diagram stood 3 control valves. The first was labelled Baths, the second Reservoir, and the third Lower Main. All were closed. Eleanor placed one hand on the valve for the baths. "Should you?" Matthew asked. "No." She moved instead to a smaller brass cock beneath the pressure gauge. It appeared to be a drain for testing whether the vessel contained water. She positioned an empty bucket below it and turned the handle a fraction. Nothing happened. She opened it farther. A violent jet of black water struck the bucket, overturned it, and sprayed across the chamber. Eleanor twisted the handle closed, but the corroded stem caught. Matthew seized a rag, wrapped it around the valve, and forced it backward. The flow stopped. Eleanor leaned against the wall, soaked from the waist down. The mistake had cost them only a bucketful of water, but the pressure behind it had been unmistakable. "The spring is not dry," Matthew said. "No, part of the system is still under hydraulic pressure." She examined the gauge. Its needle, stuck beneath corrosion, had shifted slightly when the water escaped. The upper supply remained connected somewhere beyond the blocked section. They spent the next hour drying the floor and recording every label. Eleanor did not touch another valve. At the rear of the chamber, she found a shallow iron cabinet secured by a simple latch. Gideon's men had searched it. Its 3 drawers stood open, and the lowest had been bent by a pry bar. The cabinet appeared empty until Eleanor measured its depth. The exterior was 14 inches deep, the interior only 11. She removed the drawer and pressed along the back panel. A spring catch released a false partition. Inside lay a roll of linen wrapped around a broken red sealing cord. Most of the document had been cut away. Only one narrow strip remained, bearing part of a handwritten sentence. Upon cessation of commercial bathing, the waters, conduits, purification apparatus, and all lands necessary to their operation shall be held. The sentence ended at the blade mark. Beneath it was a signature. Not Elias Dacre's, Miriam Dacre. The ink had faded to brown, but the signature remained firm and deliberate. Eleanor wrapped the linen strip in clean paper and locked it inside her trunk. A severed clause proved that Miriam Dacre had intended something for the water system. It did not prove what she intended, whether the document had been executed, or who now possessed the missing portion. Before Eleanor could search further, Annie Bell ran into the pump chamber. "My brother cannot stop being sick." Matthew was already carrying 12-year-old Joseph toward the manager's office. The boy's face was grey, his lips dry. Behind them came Dr. Ashcombe, followed by 2 women from the lower village, asking whether Bellwater possessed any clean water. 6 households are ill, the doctor said, after examining Joseph. All draw from the same lower well. The rain has made matters worse. Eleanor looked toward the hidden machinery. There is water under pressure in the upper conduit. Can it be drunk? I do not know. Dr. Ashcombe collected a sample from the testing valve. The water emerged dark for several seconds, then cleared. He held the glass toward the window, smelled it, and touched a drop to his tongue. No foul odour, no obvious mineral contamination, but we boil it before anyone drinks. The women had brought 2 pails. More villagers were already gathering outside. Eleanor could draw water 1 bucket at a time from the testing cock, but the valve was corroded and difficult to close. The slate diagram offered another possibility. The pipe marked Public Main led toward the lower village. If it survived, opening the corresponding control might send water to the abandoned stone pump near the cottages. It might also burst beneath the bathhouse floor. She spent an hour tracing the visible connections. The public main valve had seized. Its leather packing had hardened, and one retaining nut was missing. The kind of small but essential fitting Gideon's men had removed. Matthew offered to send for the village blacksmith. "The Vale office owns his debt," Eleanor said. "He may refuse." "He may. We should still ask." The blacksmith did refuse to come, but he sold Matthew a suitable nut, leather, and tallow for 3 shillings. Eleanor paid another 2 shillings for coal to boil water and 6pence for a cartload of clean barrels borrowed from the brewery. By noon, nearly £1 of her remaining money was gone. They replaced the packing and freed the valve, one careful turn at a time. Eleanor then walked the likely route of the public main, checking the ground for soft patches that might indicate broken pipes. Near the lower village pump, she found an iron cap beneath decades of soil. It carried the same initials as the conduit stones, BW. The public main had not been imaginary. It had been buried. Eleanor returned to the bathhouse and placed her hand on the valve. Someone must watch the ground along the route. If it begins to sink or flood, signal immediately. Matthew took position halfway down the line. Annie waited near the village pump with Dr. Ashcombe. Eleanor opened the upper spring valve first. The pressure gauge trembled. A deep vibration passed through the chamber, followed by a series of knocks from the pipes. Eleanor opened the public main no more than a quarter turn. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Annie's distant shout carried through the cold air. Water burst from the lower pump in a brown surge. Villagers stepped back, but the flow gradually cleared. By the time Eleanor reached them, a bright stream was pouring into the drainage trough. Dr. Ashcombe ordered every pail boiled. No one complained. A woman who had mocked Eleanor in the market hall filled 2 buckets and whispered, "Thank you," without meeting her eyes. Matthew said nothing. He stood beside his sick son with one hand over his face. The water continued through the afternoon. Eleanor remained near the pump chamber, checking the pressure and inspecting the floors for leaks. When darkness came, she could hear voices outside as families carried clean water home. A carriage stopped at the entrance. Gideon Vale entered with Pritchard and estate foreman Mr. Clegg, the man Annie had seen digging beside the conduit. "You have interfered with a watercourse on my land," Gideon said. "The spring and conduit belong to Bellwater Baths. According to a superseded plan. According to my deed." Pritchard handed her a formal notice. Gideon intended to seek an injunction preventing her from entering the disputed strip or drawing water across it. The notice also held her personally responsible for any damage caused by reopening the pipes. Gideon glanced toward the villagers' pails. "Close the valve tonight, and I may allow the purchase offer to stand. People are ill. The parish has other wells. Contaminated wells." His voice lowered. "You have £4, a condemned building, and debts 6 times greater than your savings. Do not mistake desperation for authority." Eleanor looked through the open door. Annie was carrying a kettle toward Joseph. Beyond her, a line of villagers waited beneath the lanterns with empty pails. If Eleanor closed the valve, she might protect her legal position until the boundary dispute was heard. If she left it open, Gideon could claim continuing trespass and damages she had no means to pay. She signed Pritchard's copy to acknowledge receipt of the notice. Then she returned to the hidden chamber and opened the public main valve another quarter turn. The pipes shuddered beneath her hand. Gideon's public mask finally broke. "You will lose this place," he said. Eleanor watched the pressure needle rise and heard clean water running toward the village. "Then you will have to take it while everyone is watching." For 3 days, clean water continued to reach the lower village. Joseph Bell's fever eased. 2 other children recovered enough to eat, and Dr. Ashcombe publicly advised families to avoid the contaminated wells. Each improvement made Gideon's claim that Bellwater's water system was obsolete more difficult to maintain. It also increased the pressure on Eleanor. Pritchard delivered notice of a hearing concerning the disputed boundary. The parish surveyor demanded proof that the old pipes were safe. Gideon's tenants were warned that anyone helping Eleanor might lose estate work. Matthew came anyway. They kept the public main valve at half flow and inspected the visible pipes twice each day. Eleanor recorded every pressure reading. The needle remained steady, and no wet ground appeared along the buried line. On the 4th night, she awoke to silence. The pipes had stopped knocking. She sat up in the manager's office, listening. Then a deep, metallic groan travelled through the floor. Eleanor seized her lantern and ran toward the pump chamber. The pressure gauge needle had climbed beyond its highest marked figure. The valve controlling the upper spring stood fully open. She had left it at 1/4. The public main valve had been closed, trapping the incoming water inside the system. Eleanor reached for the pressure release cock. It would not move. Wire had been twisted around the stem and driven beneath the handle. Someone had jammed it deliberately. She pulled at the wire until it cut through her glove. The handle remained fixed. Behind her, the pressure vessel began to shudder. "Matthew!" He was sleeping in the attendance room while repairing the remaining guttering. He entered just as Eleanor wrapped an iron bar beneath the valve handle. "Close the upper supply," she said. Together they forced the main wheel backward. It moved half a turn, then stopped against something lodged inside the pipe. A hammering blow struck beneath the floor. The tiles rose. Eleanor barely had time to push Matthew toward the doorway before the buried pipe ruptured. Water exploded through the floor, throwing broken tiles and black mud against the walls. The lantern went out. In darkness, the pressure vessel tore loose from one mounting and crashed into the slate diagram. Water filled the chamber to Eleanor's ankles, then her knees. They fought their way into the gallery. A support timber shifted as water undermined its footing. Matthew tried to brace it, but Eleanor dragged him back moments before part of the western ceiling collapsed. Plaster, slate, and rotten wood buried the doorway to the hidden chamber. Cold water spread through the bathing gallery and poured into the lower rooms. By dawn, the flow had weakened, but the damage was severe. The western floor had sunk several inches. 2 roof supports lay broken. The public main no longer delivered water to the village. Gideon arrived before the parish surveyor. He stood outside with Pritchard, Mr. Clegg, and 2 constables, while villagers gathered at the gate. "My niece was warned," Gideon announced. "She operated decayed machinery without authority and endangered the entire district." Eleanor emerged covered in mud, her injured hand wrapped in cloth. "The valves were altered during the night." "By whom?" "Someone who knew the system." Gideon looked toward the shattered windows. "You have spent a week breaking into walls and turning devices you do not understand. Now you invent an intruder." Clegg avoided her eyes. The parish surveyor inspected the western wing and declared it unsafe. Until repairs were made, no one could enter the pump chamber or operate the water apparatus. He sealed the principal valves under parish authority. Several villagers protested, but others stared at the collapsed roof and remained silent. Clean water had won Eleanor cautious trust. The flood returned their fear. Dr. Ashcombe arranged for barrels to be brought from the upper farms, though the cost would fall upon the families receiving them. Eleanor watched the first cart arrive. She had reopened a public supply for 4 days, only to leave the village dependent on expensive deliveries. Inside the manager's office, she discovered that the disaster had cost her more than stone and machinery. Her trunk stood open, the lock had been forced, and the paper containing Miriam Dacre's severed claws was gone. Her clothes remained. So did the 7 shillings hidden beneath them. The thief had taken only the document. Eleanor sat beside the cold fireplace while Matthew examined the broken lock. "I should never have opened the system," she said. "Then Joseph and 5 other children would still have drunk from the lower well. And now I have damaged the apparatus, lost the only written evidence, and given Gideon grounds to close the building." "You did not close that valve." "I failed to secure it." The distinction mattered in law, perhaps, but it offered little comfort. Matthew found muddy prints beneath the window. Rain had blurred their shape, yet one print contained a narrow cross pattern from a repaired boot sole. Clegg's left boot had carried the same patch when he stood beside Gideon that morning. It proved nothing. A foreman's boots were not a signature. When Matthew left, Eleanor opened her father's field book. It was the one piece of evidence she had kept in her coat during the flood. She read every Bellwater entry again, searching for a measurement she had overlooked. Near the final page, 2 sheets had been fastened together by damp. Eleanor separated them carefully. Between them, in her father's faintest writing, appeared a note she had never seen. Miriam's instrument was never the legacy. Follow the 3 elevations. The witness remains above the waterline. Below it, Samuel Vale had written 3 numbers: 308, 309, 310. The first belonged to the western culvert. The second belonged to the brass plate inside the bathhouse. Somewhere on Bellwater land, 47 feet above them both, waited the final measurement her father had died trying to protect. Eleanor placed the 3 elevations beside the 1816 plan. The western culvert, at 308 feet, carried overflow towards Stag Beck. The brass plate at 312 marked the bathhouse distribution level. The third point, 347 feet, had to stand high enough to maintain pressure through the entire system. It was not inside the ruined building. It was the upper reservoir. At sunrise, Eleanor asked Matthew to cut 2 straight staffs, each marked in 1-foot divisions. Using a board, a glass vial filled with water, and one of her plumb bobs, she constructed a simple level. It lacked the precision of her father's instrument, but by working in short stages and checking every rise twice, she could follow the slope upward from the known bathhouse benchmark. Matthew carried the forward staff. Eleanor took the readings and recorded each change. At 35 feet above the brass plate, they reached a shelf of ground hidden behind gorse. The 1816 plan placed the original boundary corner nearby, but no reservoir was visible. Eleanor took a compass bearing from the 2 conduit stones below. Their arrows did not point directly toward the spring. Extended uphill, the lines crossed beside a leaning ash tree. Beneath its roots lay a granite block marked with a small triangle. "A boundary stone?" Matthew asked. "A witness stone. It marks a corner that could not be placed at the true point." Eleanor cleared the moss. Below the triangle, an arrow pointed 14 feet north. There they found a circular stone cap buried beneath the turf. Dr. Ashcombe joined them before it was opened. Eleanor wanted an independent witness, someone with no financial interest in Bellwater Baths. Together, they removed the cap and uncovered a narrow inspection shaft. The water stood several feet below, clear enough for them to see brick lining and the mouth of the upper conduit. Set into the shaft wall, safely above the highest water stain, was a copper cylinder. The witness remained above the waterline. Eleanor recorded its position before touching it. Matthew and Dr. Ashcombe signed the entry in her field book. Only then did she remove the cylinder from its stone recess. Its waxed seal bore the initials MD. Inside were 3 documents wrapped in oiled silk, a small engineering notebook, and a letter. The first document was a counterpart indenture dated March 1856. It carried the seals of Dr. Elias Dacre, Miriam Dacre, and 2 trustees whose names Eleanor recognized from old Bellwater families. The boundaries matched Eleanor's deed, including the disputed strip, upper reservoir, conduit, and 14 acres of meadow now treated as Vale property. The severed sentence appeared in full. Upon cessation of commercial bathing, the waters, conduits, purification apparatus, and all lands necessary to their operation shall be held in trust for the health and benefit of the working inhabitants of Bellwater. Bellwater Baths remained the legal operating property, but its owner was required to maintain public access to clean water. Income from the upper meadow, laundry rooms, and affordable bathing facilities was to support repairs. The arrangement was not charity, dependent on a wealthy benefactor. Miriam had designed a system capable of financing itself. The second document was a certified copy of Miriam's patent specification for a pressure-regulating and layered filtration apparatus. Her notebook contained years of trials using gravel, charcoal, and sand, along with calculations showing how the upper spring could drive water uphill through sections of the pipe before gravity carried it toward the village. The supposedly impossible gradient had never been an error. It was evidence of controlled pressure. The third document listed the original trustees and instructed that replacements be chosen from the parish doctor, the bathhouse owner, and elected householders using the public main. A notation named the diocesan registry, where another copy had been deposited. The papers in the cylinder were powerful, but they were not sufficient alone. Eleanor would still need the registry copy, parish records confirming the trustees, and testimony connecting the original boundaries to the present property. Miriam had anticipated that. Her notebook identified every conduit marker, benchmark, and inspection point. The brass plate at 312, the stones marked BW, the hidden chamber, and the upper witness stone formed a physical chain across the land. Gideon could dispute one plan. He could not easily explain an entire water system built to match it. The final letter revealed why Miriam had concealed the documents. Her father had publicly presented the purification apparatus as his own work, believing no investor would trust a woman engineer. After the fever deaths, contaminated water from an improperly maintained guest cistern had been blamed on Miriam's system. The baths closed, her work was discredited, and neighbouring landowners tried to seize the spring. Before leaving Bellwater, she created the trust and hid its counterpart where only someone capable of reconstructing her measurements could find it. Her last paragraph was addressed not to an heir, but to a future surveyor. Value is safest when entrusted to the person willing to measure honestly, even when honesty reduces what they may claim for themselves. Eleanor read the sentence twice. Her father had not been losing his judgment when he challenged Gideon's boundary. He had been following Miriam's evidence. Gideon had erased Samuel's correction because restoring the 14 acres and water rights would expose years of unlawful estate income. The legacy was not a fortune waiting in a box. It was land, clean water, a sustainable public institution, and the name of a woman whose work had been buried for nearly 30 years. Eleanor closed the notebook. That afternoon, Gideon posted notice of a public parish meeting to demand that Bellwater Baths be condemned and its water system permanently sealed. For the first time since entering the market hall, Eleanor welcomed the thought of speaking before the entire village. 3 days later, Eleanor returned to the market hall where Gideon had erased her name. This time, no one laughed when she entered. The lower village families filled the rear benches. Matthew sat beside Annie and Joseph, whose colour had returned. Dr. Ashcombe stood near the clerk's table with the copper cylinder and Miriam Dacre's documents locked inside his medical case. Gideon occupied the same place beside the great parish map. He began by describing the flood, the collapsed western ceiling, and Eleanor's unauthorised operation of the water system. He proposed that Bellwater Baths be condemned, the machinery sealed, and the property sold to satisfy its unpaid rates. The safety of this village, he concluded, cannot be entrusted to an inexperienced young woman guided by obsession. Eleanor waited until the murmuring stopped. The lower wells made 6 households ill. Bellwater's public main supplied clean water for 4 days without a single leak until someone closed the outlet, opened the upper supply, and disabled the pressure release. Gideon dismissed the claim as an attempt to avoid responsibility. Eleanor placed her survey drawing beside his map. She showed the hall the boundary in her deed, the matching line on the 1816 plan, and the physical chain formed by the BW conduit stones. She explained the 3 elevations and how they led to the upper reservoir. Then Dr. Ashcombe opened his case. The meeting chairman examined Miriam's counterpart indenture, but warned that a document found inside a hidden cylinder could not by itself settle ownership. "I agree," Eleanor said. Gideon's smile returned. The side door opened. Matthew entered with a messenger, who had arrived on the afternoon train from Carlisle. Dr. Ashcombe had travelled there the day after the discovery and located the diocesan registry named in Miriam's papers. The messenger carried a certified extract bearing the registry seal. It recorded the same 1856 trust, the same 14 acres, and the same obligation to maintain public access to Bellwater's water. Gideon leaned toward Pritchard. The solicitor read the extract, then whispered something Eleanor could not hear. The parish clerk compared Miriam's trustee list with old rate books. 2 original trustees appeared there, each charged a nominal sum for the upper meadow until the entries abruptly disappeared 18 years earlier, the year Gideon had assumed control of the Vale estate office. Eleanor placed Miriam's patent specification beside the slate diagram she had copied before the flood. The labels, pipe routes, and pressure calculations matched the surviving apparatus. "You called the gradient an error," the chairman said to Gideon. "It may still be one." "It carried water uphill and then supplied the village," Eleanor replied. "That is not an opinion. We watched it happen. Matthew testified to opening the hidden chamber and witnessing the discovery of the severed document. Dr. Ashcombe confirmed the cylinder had been removed from the upper reservoir in his presence, its seal intact. Gideon rose. This entire performance rests upon papers assembled by my niece and a few sympathetic friends. I possess the only fragment found inside the bathhouse itself. From Pritchard's document box, he withdrew Miriam's stolen linen strip. The room became still. Eleanor did not reach for it. That fragment was removed from the false back of the iron cabinet, she said. Matthew witnessed the discovery. Dr. Ashcombe saw it wrapped and locked inside my trunk before the flood. Pritchard turned toward Gideon. You told me Mr. Clegg recovered this from the outer excavation last summer. Then Miss Vale's account is false. Matthew stood. The cut edge matches the missing portion of the counterpart indenture. More importantly, it was in her trunk the night someone entered through the manager's window. Annie pointed toward Clegg, who stood near the door. He has the patched boot. The chairman ordered the constable to examine it. The cross-shaped repair matched the print Matthew had recorded beneath Eleanor's window. Gideon's voice sharpened. Clegg was instructed only to protect estate property. The foreman stared at him. You told me to block the conduit. Do not compound your misconduct. You gave me the clay, the wire, and the key to the outer pump door. Clegg's face had gone pale. You said the flood would prove she was unfit to keep the place. Gideon had spent years protecting himself by shifting blame to weaker people. Faced with public exposure, he attempted the same tactic once too often. Clegg described removing the retaining fittings, stealing the linen fragment, and reversing the valves. He claimed he had not expected the pipe to burst, but the constable reminded him that intention would be considered elsewhere. The meeting could not decide criminal guilt or final title. It could decide whether Bellwater Baths should be condemned without further inquiry. The proposal failed by 29 votes to 4. A second resolution recognised the surviving water trust provisionally and appointed Dr. Ashcombe, Eleanor, and 2 elected householders to protect the spring and documents until the court reviewed the registry evidence. Gideon left before the vote was recorded. Pritchard remained. He informed the chairman that the Vale estate would require an independent accounting. Rent from the disputed meadow had been collected for 18 years, and Gideon's altered surveys had supported every payment. Outside the hall, villagers gathered around Eleanor. Some apologized. Others simply offered labor, timber, or the use of a cart. One man who had mocked her inheritance promised nothing and walked away, preserving at least one honest measure of Bellwater's opinion. Matthew handed Eleanor her father's field book. On the page where Samuel had written the 3 elevations, the parish chairman had added a final line beneath the official meeting record. Boundary correction submitted by Eleanor Vale, surveyor. Her name had returned to the map. This time, no one could remove it without removing the truth beneath it. Eleanor carried the field book back to Bellwater Baths beneath a clear winter sky. The building remained flooded, partially condemned, and burdened with debt. Public vindication had not repaired a single rafter. The following morning, she and Matthew began by lifting wet floorboards and marking every timber that could be saved. The legal work moved more slowly. Copies of Miriam Dacre's indenture were found in the diocesan registry and among the papers of one original trustee's descendants. The court accepted the physical conduit markers, the reservoir benchmark, the 1816 plan, and Eleanor's survey as a consistent chain of evidence. The 14 disputed acres, upper spring, reservoir, and conduits were restored to the Bellwater property under the terms of Miriam's trust. 18 years of meadow rents required a separate accounting. The Vale estate eventually repaid enough to settle the Bathhouse's parish rates and fund essential water repairs, though not enough to restore the entire building. Gideon's own correspondence was recovered from the surveying office. One instruction directed Clegg to make the abandoned system incapable of troublesome demonstration. Another authorized the removal of fittings from the hidden chamber. Clegg admitted theft and malicious damage and received a short term of imprisonment after cooperating with the investigation. Gideon was found responsible for directing the sabotage, altering estate records, and concealing trust income. He was ordered to pay damages, removed from management of the Vale properties, and prohibited from acting as a trustee. His surveying practice did not survive the public inquiry. He never apologized to Eleanor. She ceased waiting for him to become the kind of man who could. The first winter at Bellwater was spent on survival rather than beauty. Matthew and 3 hired labourers shored the western wing, replaced the broken main beneath the pump chamber, and built a temporary roof over the collapsed gallery. Only the manager's office, attendance room, and eastern kitchen remained heated. Eleanor kept exact accounts. Restoring everything at once would consume money the trust did not possess, so she divided the work into stages. Clean water came first. Miriam's purification vessel was too badly damaged to reuse safely. Following the surviving patent drawings, a firm in Carlisle manufactured a replacement pressure regulator. Local workers rebuilt the gravel, charcoal, and sand filters under Eleanor's supervision. Every section of pipe was tested separately before the public main reopened. When water returned to the lower village pump in March, Dr. Ashcombe required regular inspection and boiling advisories until repeated examinations showed the supply remained clear and uncontaminated. No ceremony was held that day. Families simply arrived with pails and carried home water they no longer feared. By late spring, the upper meadow was leased for grazing. Its rent paid the pump keeper and covered routine maintenance. The restored laundry rooms opened in June, allowing village women to wash clothes with heated, clean water for a modest charge. 2 bathing rooms followed, one reserved for families unable to pay. The income was small but steady. Eleanor converted the eastern parlour into a surveying office. Her first commissions came from farmers who wanted their boundaries checked against Vale records. She accepted only work she could complete accurately and refused several clients who asked her to produce the answer they preferred. By autumn, she had earned enough to replace the manager's office window with glass. Matthew became superintendent of the building and waterworks. Annie spent Saturday mornings copying numbers into maintenance books. Eleanor taught her how to hold a staff level, how to distinguish an estimate from a measurement, and why every correction required a date and signature. Joseph recovered fully. Dr. Ashcombe used 2 restored rooms as a weekly clinic, paid for partly by the laundry and meadow income. Not everyone in Bellwater admired the transformation. One parish member continued to insist the building should have been demolished. Others complained about fees or the pace of repairs. Eleanor recorded useful criticism and ignored contempt that offered no remedy. 11 months after she first entered the ruin, the eastern roof was sound, the water system operated reliably, and half the bathing gallery remained closed behind a locked door, awaiting future funds. Restoration had not made Bellwater Baths grand again. It had made the property useful. At the building's reopening, the parish chairman unveiled a simple brass plaque beside the entrance. Bellwater Waterworks, designed by Miriam Dacre, restored under her public trust. Inside the manager's office, Eleanor placed Miriam's engineering notebook in a glass-fronted cabinet. Beside it lay Samuel Vale's field book, opened to the 3 elevations that had led her to the reservoir. Below them, Eleanor displayed the corrected boundary survey under her own signature. Her father had given her the tools to recognize the truth, but he had also allowed much of her early work to remain hidden beneath his name. Loving him no longer required pretending that silence had been fair. By naming both his courage and his failure, Eleanor freed herself from inheriting either one unquestioned. That evening, after the visitors departed, she walked alone through the restored eastern gallery. The marble tubs had been cleaned, the windows repaired, and the tarred warning removed. Its faint shadow remained beneath the new lime wash, visible only when the light struck at an angle. Eleanor chose not to cover it again. At the lower village pump, Annie filled a cup and carried it to a child waiting beside the trough. Far above them, the upper spring entered Miriam's conduit at 347 feet. The water descended, crossed the old culvert, rose through the pressure chamber, and continued toward the village. Inside Bellwater Baths, the gauge settled precisely at 312. Eleanor entered the figure in the maintenance book and signed her name beneath it. Outside, clean water kept running through the dark.